You've probably heard this sentence before, maybe even said it yourself without realizing how wild it sounds. Wow, you have an accent. It's usually delivered with genuine curiosity, sometimes admiration, sometimes confusion. And yet, buried inside that sentence is one of the funniest assumptions in modern culture. The idea that everyone else in the world has an accent, except Americans. Because somehow, in this unspoken rulebook, Americans don't have accents. They're just talking normally. Everyone else? Accented. And the moment you notice this idea, you start seeing it everywhere. Welcome back to my channel. If you're new here, please subscribe, like my video, and turn on notifications so you don't miss our next update. It shows up in airports, in classrooms, on TikTok, in call centers, in comment sections, and especially when Americans travel abroad. It's one of those cultural blind spots that feels harmless at first, until you zoom out and realize how strange it actually is. Here's where the irony kicks in. An accent is simply the way you pronounce a language based on where you learned it. That's it. There is no default, no neutral, no normal setting. Every single human being who speaks has an accent, including Americans, including every American accent you can think of. Southern, Boston, New York, Midwest, California, Texas. All accents. And yet, many Americans grow up believing theirs doesn't count. This belief usually starts early. In American movies and TV shows, the American accent is treated as invisible. British characters have accents. Villains often have accents. Foreign characters definitely have accents. But the American voice is framed as the baseline. It's the sound that doesn't need explaining. So when Americans hear someone from another country speak English, the brain does something automatic. It labels the difference as an accent, instead of recognizing it as simply another version of the same language. This becomes especially obvious the moment Americans leave the US. Picture an American ordering coffee in London. The barista speaks perfect English, clear pronunciation, rich vocabulary, and yet the American walks away thinking, wow, everyone here has such strong accents. Meanwhile, the barista is thinking, that American accent is loud. Because here's the part that really surprises people. In other countries, Americans are the ones with the accent, a very noticeable one. Ask people in Europe, Africa, Asia, or Australia what Americans sound like, and they'll tell you immediately. They'll describe the drawn-out vowels, the R sounds, the volume, the rhythm. Some will even imitate it. Not to be rude, just because it's distinct, because it is. But for many Americans, this is the first time the idea even crosses their mind. Wait, I have an accent? Yes, you always did. One of the funniest places this shows up is in call centers and customer service interactions. You'll see Americans frustrated saying things like, I can't understand you, why do you have such a strong accent? Even though the other person is speaking slower, clearer English than most people they talk to all day. What they really mean is, you don't sound like me. And that difference gets mistaken for difficulty, even when comprehension isn't actually the problem. Another classic moment happens in classrooms and universities. International students speak up. And suddenly, their accent becomes the focus instead of what they're saying. Meanwhile, American students never think of themselves as accented, even though to everyone else in the room, they absolutely are. This idea of the neutral American accent is especially funny when you remember that Americans can't even agree on what their own accent sounds like. Someone from Texas hears a New Yorker and says they sound wild. Someone from California hears a Southern accent and says it's strong. Someone from Boston hears literally anyone else. So how did Americans end up believing they're the exception? A big part of it comes down to media dominance. American movies, music, and television are everywhere. When your accent is constantly broadcast globally, it starts feeling like the standard. But popularity doesn't equal neutrality. It just means it's familiar. Familiarity tricks the brain. What you hear most often feels normal. Everything else feels other. And to be fair, this isn't unique to Americans. People everywhere can fall into this trap. But Americans stand out because English is spoken globally, and American English is especially loud on the world stage. The real culture shock comes when Americans live abroad for a while. At first, they notice accents everywhere. British accents, Australian accents, Indian accents, Nigerian accents, French accents. Then slowly, something shifts. They start hearing patterns. They stop translating in their heads. And one day, it hits them. These people don't sound accented anymore. Instead, Americans start noticing their own voice. They hear themselves ordering food, asking questions, speaking faster than everyone else, using idioms no one recognizes. And for the first time, they experience what it's like to be the accented one. This is often followed by a humbling moment, realizing that the confusion goes both ways. That communication isn't about who speaks correctly, but about meeting in the middle. And once that realization lands, the joke stops being on everyone else. It becomes obvious how strange it was to assume an entire planet of English speakers somehow deviated from one country's pronunciation. The funniest part is that many Americans don't mean any harm by it. It's not malice, it's insulation. Growing up in a place where your accent is rarely challenged creates a quiet assumption that it's just how English sounds until it isn't. And when that bubble pops, it's usually memorable, slightly embarrassing, and oddly freeing, because once you accept that you have an accent too, conversations change. Curiosity replaces judgment. Listening replaces correcting. And suddenly, accents stop being obstacles and start being evidence of something cool. That English doesn't belong to one country. It belongs to everyone who speaks it. So the next time someone says, "You have an accent," maybe the real response isn't offense or surprise. Maybe it's laughter, because everyone does. And if you've ever caught yourself thinking everyone else sounds accented except you, congratulations. You're not alone. You're just human. Once Americans realize they have an accent too, the next phase is usually denial. Not full denial, just gentle bargaining. Okay, maybe I technically have an accent, but it's not strong, which is exactly what everyone with an accent says. This is where things get even funnier, because Americans then start discovering that their accent isn't just noticeable, it's memorable. People abroad can often identify an American within seconds, not because they're listening closely, but because the rhythm gives it away. The speed, the confidence, the way sentences end like statements even when they're questions. And suddenly, Americans experience a brand new feeling, being asked where they're from before they've even finished a sentence. This is usually followed by another surprise, being imitated. Not mockingly, but casually. Someone repeats a phrase back in an exaggerated American tone, and for the first time, Americans hear themselves from the outside, and that's when it clicks. Oh, that's what we sound like. At this point, many Americans also realize how much effort other people put into understanding them. Slowing down, adjusting vocabulary, switching accents depending on who they're speaking to, something Americans rarely have to do back home. That realization can be uncomfortable, but it's also eye-opening, because once you notice accents as mutual, not one-sided, something changes. Conversations feel more equal, less about who sounds right and more about understanding each other. Accents stop being ranked and start being recognized as stories. Clues about where someone learned language, traveled, lived, and adapted. And maybe that's the biggest shift of all. The moment Americans stop asking, "Why do you have an accent?" and start thinking, "Oh, you learned English differently than I did." Not better, not worse, just different. So if part 1 was about the illusion of being accentless, part 2 is about perspective, about realizing that sounding different doesn't mean sounding wrong. And once you truly accept that, accents stop being something you notice first and start being something you stop noticing at all. If this made you rethink a phrase you've casually used your whole life, you're not alone. Drop your funniest accent realization moment in the comments, and let's compare notes. And if you want more cultural blind spots quietly exposed, you know what to do. Stick around. If you've had a moment where traveling, studying abroad, or even a random conversation made you realize this, share it in the comments. Those moments are usually the funniest stories. And if you enjoy cultural deep dives like this one, make sure to like, subscribe, and stick around, because the world has a lot of quiet assumptions left to unpack, and they're almost always more entertaining once you hear them out loud.